We were somewhere in Exodus. 26. We're in 26.
Chapter 26.
Yeah. We're talking about sea cows and stuff.
Yeah, we talked about sea cows, that's right.
Chapter 27?
Yep. 6.
Is that where we started then in chapter? Where we started
No,
in chapter
I think we
27?
started new, didn't we?
No, we're gonna start.
I think we're on 9.
We're on 9.
I think we.
9.
I
Yeah,
don't have
somewhere
that sheet in
along.
front of me.
Actually,
What
we're
does
in
9 say?
Genesis.
It's a spring.
This is a who's on first situation. No, what? What's on first?
Framing.
Framing. Okay. So we're like on the wood framing.
I got a picture, Joe, of who's on first.
Yeah.
The guy is the HU. He's on first base. I
Yeah.
got a picture of that
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's what we're dangerously diving into there. So
No,
it's
yeah,
good.
I got it.
It's good. No. I just meant in terms of the bit, you know?
Yeah,
It's good. Such a classic.
yeah.
All right, so we're going to be looking at Exodus. We'll just start in 26. We'll go with because there's not a lot to talk about for the rest. I think we talked about, I do remember us talking a little bit about the, let's just start in verse 15, because again, it's mainly just the framing conversation. If you got your picture, we can start there, and then we'll talk about the curtain, the veil, and then the screen, and then go into the bronze altar, the cord of the tabernacle, the oil for lamp. Cool. All right, so 26 verse 15, we'll just run right into this. You shall make upright frames for the tabernacle of acacia wood. 10 cubits shall be the length of a frame, and 1.5 cubits the breadth of each frame. There shall be 2 tenons in each frame for fitting together. So shall you do for all the frames of the tabernacle. You shall make the frames for the tabernacle, 20 frames for the south side, and 40 bases of silver. You shall make under the 20 frames 2 bases under one frame for its 2 tenons, and 2 bases under the next frame for its 2 tenons. And for the second side of the tabernacle, on the north side, 20 frames, and their 40 bases of silver, 2 bases under one frame, and 2 bases under the next frame. And for the rear of the tabernacle westward, you shall make 6 frames. And you shall make 2 frames for corners of the tabernacle in the rear. They shall be separate beneath, but joined at the top, at the first ring. Thus shall it be with both of them. They shall form the 2 corners, and there shall be 8 frames with their bases of silver, 16 bases, 2 bases under one frame, and 2 bases under another frame. You shall make bars of acacia wood, 5 for the frames of the one side of the tabernacle, 5 bars for the frames on the other side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the frames of the side of the tabernacle of the rear westward. That's fun to say. Rear westward. The middle bar halfway up the frame shall run from end to end. You shall overlay the frames with gold, and shall make the rings of gold for holders for the bars, and you shall overlay the bars with gold. Then you shall erect the tabernacle according to the plan for it that you were shown on the mountain. All right, so we've got a bar there, right? Like just kind of what this all looks like. That's why I sent around that picture. I don't know if anybody still needs that picture. It was a couple weeks ago at this point, but it just gives you an idea of the framing. That's the wood slats that you kind of see inside of there. That's what's being described. And the main takeaway in that element is just, again, the exacting nature of God, right? This is what it's supposed to look like. And part of that, again, is because the tabernacle is a reflection of eternity, right? It is the place where God dwells. We talked about the cherubim on the curtains in the Holy of Holies, right? Because that's what it looks like in heaven. These exacting measurements are meant to be a reflection of heaven. Imperfect as they are, because it's on this side of eternity, but also meant to be a remembrance, a symbol for eternity and what that looks like and continues to look like. So a lot of details. There'll be a quiz later on that. So,
Yeah.
how many on the westward rear wall, right? You gotta say it fast. You can't just say it. So again, and even in this, the materials being used, still the best of the best, because again, reflecting eternity. All right, so if there's no more questions, we'll jump into verse 31 there.
Yeah.
And you shall make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. It shall be made with cherubim skillfully worked into it. See, there's the cherubim again element. And you shall hang it on the 4 pillars of acacia overlaid with gold, with hooks of gold on 4 bases of silver. And you shall hang the veil from the clasps, and bring the ark of the testimony in there within the veil. And the veil shall separate for you the holy place from the most holy. You shall put the mercy seat on the ark of the testimony in the most holy place. And you shall set the table outside the veil, and the lampstand on the south side of the tabernacle opposite the table. And you shall put the table on the north side. So this is the curtain that would be at the temple later, the curtain that was torn in two when Jesus was crucified, okay? So don't know if it's the exact curtain, right, but this is the concept. It would be the curtain that would separate everything else from the Holy of Holies. And if I understood correctly what was shared, like the depth of that thing is like four fingers, right? So like it's, you know, you're looking at the front of it all nice. The thickness of it is 4 fingers thick, right? That's kind of what's being described there. And so as you talk about that being torn open after Jesus' death, it's not like it got snagged on something and, you know, ripped open. It's a pretty powerful movement that's happening in that, right? And so again, you just see the best of materials being used. You see the cherubim in there, again, as a reflection of what's going on. Hey, when you enter this place, you are entering into eternity, right? Which is why only the high priest could enter into that place when it was allowed, when it was supposed to happen. Any questions at all on that? Did we talk about the significance of the curtain temple, the temple curtain being torn in two? A couple weeks ago, Sherry McGuire, I think I mentioned Sherry in here, about she talked with a friend of hers who had done religious studies and the significance of that curtain temple being torn in two, right? Because now you can see inside, and you see that not only is God not there, but the Ark of the Covenant is not there, right? And so oftentimes when we talk about the curtain temple being torn in two, you know, we talk about it from a Christian point of view, which is, hey, God's on the loose, right? He's doing his thing. You don't need this between you and God anymore. He's with his people always, right? But for the Jewish people at that time, you're going, well, now what? Right? There is no ark. There is no God back there. What are you supposed to do? Right?
Believe in Jesus.
Right. Well, and that's, so think about that, Nate. You talk about the disruption that causes in the religious life, right? Sherry had shared that this friend of hers, there was an increase in wisdom elements to the Jewish religion at that time. So in other words, it went away from like the theological to the pursuit of wisdom. Because in the absence of God, what do you fill that void with? Well, you fill it with wisdom, right? The self-improvement, the desire for growth and self-growth, right? And so you could see in that moment a shift. Now, whether or not it would be acknowledged that that's the reason why is not there, right? Because then you would have to acknowledge that Jesus' death did a lot more than just a man dying on the cross. But there is a shift in the history of Judaism at that moment. But also you think of Pentecost, right? So you think of Pentecost, how many days after the crucifixion, the resurrection of Jesus, you know, the Holy Spirit comes, all of thousands of people come to faith, and we go, well, yeah, it's the Holy Spirit. Absolutely. I don't want to take anything away from that. But you got to remember, these are Jewish people who have lost their religion, right? They have no hope. There is nothing there. And now Peter gives this amazing sermon about where they can go and where they can find hope. And we wonder why 3,000 to 5,000 people, whatever that number was, converted and were baptized and believed in Jesus that day. When you have nothing there, right? When there's no God, there's no tabernacle anymore, there's no Ark of the Covenant, where are you supposed to go? What are you supposed to do? When Peter says, hey, I got something, right? Something good. So just kind of laying that out, that kind of that chronological piece to it. We don't always, we take it in chunks, right? And we don't always connect the chunks, if that makes sense. We just kind of keep them as individual situations. And so it's fun sometimes to just go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Kind of like the blind beggar this weekend and Zacchaeus, right? You take just Zacchaeus' story, you take the blind beggar's story, but you don't actually see how they play together, right? Nate, you know.
My understanding, when the curtain was ripped in two, so were the traditions of the Old Testament.
Correct.
Went along with that.
Yeah.
Jesus completed the act
Correct.
for us and for Jewish people as well.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, and that's
It's a
the
very simplified version.
it is, but it's the what would you say the Christian perspective of that.
Yeah.
Looking from the Jewish perspective, now you're going, well, geez, now what? Right? That changes everything. Right? Especially because we basically have a whole book in this Bible dedicated to what this thing is supposed to look like, right? Like there's a lot of information in exacting, and now we're just done. What does that mean, right? It's almost Wizard of Oz-esque, right? Don't go behind the curtain, and you look behind the curtain, you go, huh? That's different. Yeah. It changes things.
Say,
Nope.
Pastor,
Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned that the ark was gone
Yeah.
after Jesus died.
Yeah.
Was that? Did I miss that somewhere in the Bible, or what?
So basically, somewhere in what is commonly believed in biblical archaeology is that the ark was taken somewhere in the exiles, right? So sometime between Babylon, Assyrian exiles, that thing was taken and disappeared. Don't know where, don't know what happened to it. But that was reinforced by Josephus, his writings, when the Roman occupation happened and Roman rule over Israel. They didn't care. They went right into the Holy of Holies, and he marked that there was nothing there, like there was no Ark of the Covenant in it. So it's like a historical piece that that's gone. It doesn't exist at that point. Now, where it actually went, how it went, whatever that might be, I think we joked in here that it's in a warehouse at Area 51. Right? That's what we joked I think last time about that. But
Made for a good movie.
Yeah, made for a movie somewhere. But it's oftentimes, and the reason why biblical archaeology assumes that it's in those exiles is because in those conquerings, especially when you talk about, I think, the Assyrian conquering, they took a scorched earth approach to things. So it wasn't just, you can stay in the land and kind of thing. They burned everything. They just destroyed everything. And that way there wasn't enough resources or ability to uprise, to revolt, because you didn't have the land to survive. You didn't have anything. You had to be dependent on them. I think Babylon had more of a mixed strategy where they would send you to different cities, and that way there wasn't like a cluster of a conquered people. They were just kind of scattered throughout, and then through assimilation and things, that culture, that people would just kind of disappear into the Babylonian culture. But either way, in those instances, it was very common practice to take those things and just melt them down, right? Especially like you talk about, I think it's Babylon with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They knew how to get fiery furnaces going, like that's a thing, right? And so to melt that down would not have taken much at all, right? And how do you carry? Because that's the question: is, well, how do you move it without touching it and dying? Well, you got the poles, right?
Yeah.
Just stick them in there,
Yeah.
carry it, set it down, fire it up. Yeah. Some believe that it's buried somewhere underneath, like the Wailing Wall. I think some people have talked about. Could be. I mean, I'm not saying it's gone forever. It might show up one day. Only the U.S. government knows. No, just kidding.
Right.
And Indiana Jones.
And Indiana Jones.
So, good question. Any other questions?
Don't the Jewish people believe that Jesus is a prophet?
Somewhat,
And that
yes.
he's alive or not, but that's what,
Mhm.
and they're still like waiting.
Yep.
I mean, they still celebrate all of their holidays. Like you say, this is a Christian perspective
Yep,
that
yep.
we have.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, there's still observances of feasts and festivals and things of that nature. More in a synagogue approach, which was, if I understood correctly, was more of kind of like a post-Roman peace, right? The temple is destroyed. It's there, kind of, but now you had to figure out how do you practice your religion apart from the temple, because then you had the You had like the Ottoman Empire that came in, which was Muslim, right, and occupying that land, and so that's where the synagogue pieces kind of came into that, as well as some elements that I think in the intertestamental period. But yeah, there's still the practicing of that, but there's definitely a spectrum, variations on that. Some Jewish people are more Jewish just by nationality than religious identity, if that makes sense. And so it just depends on who you talk to on that. Yep.
The Quran, don't they admit Jesus being a prophet or a
Yep.
great priest?
Yep.
Yeah, the Quran admits that Jesus is a prophet, and what's interesting in the Quran is that it says if Jesus says it, I'm summing it up, I don't have the exact quote, but essentially whatever a prophet says, including Jesus, is the truth. And so then when you go to the scripture and you say, well, this is what Jesus says, that you can't have two things that are equally right? So in other words, it creates a conundrum. If the Quran says that everything Jesus says is true, well then here's what Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Well, now you have to go against the Quran if you're not willing to accept that, right? Which is a problem, right? Or you take the perspective of Jesus is wrong, but now you've got the Quran that says, well, but he's a prophet.
Yeah.
And so which one is it? You can't have both, right? And I think that's kind of the tough part in that, and it's interesting, you always wonder how that stuff kind of gets in there. Who is the guy who said, yeah, let's make sure that Jesus is prophet, that his words are taken, right, are
Yeah.
real.
Yeah.
And he's mentioned several times in the Quran.
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'm sorry, I think the original question is, in the Jewish religion, he's a prophet. There is that question in his ministry, right? Is he Moses? Is he Elijah?
Yeah.
Right? They kind of already pigeonholed him to some extent in those places.
But are you considered, a lot of people are not Jewish, but yet they like marry or they turn to the Jewish religion. And so then they say they're Jewish.
Sure.
And I've never really thought that they really are Jewish because they're not of the line, of the lineage.
Oh, sure. Like they're not part of like the original 12 tribes or
Right.
something like that. Yeah. So I mean, for the religion side of it, there's not a belief in conversion or outreach, right? So in other words, we would want to share the gospel with people so that they would come to know Jesus, right? For the Jewish person, there isn't an evangelism aspect to their religion. And so one of the ways that people do get added to that number, if that makes sense, is through marriage, right? And that's where that continues on from the religious side. From the nationality side, I think it's a little bit cleaner in the sense of, well, yeah, this person is Romanian or something like that. Our family comes from Israel, so we're Jewish, but it doesn't mean that the Romanian is now Jewish. So in religious practice, I think that's probably the closest they get to converts, if that makes sense, is through marriage. But it's not an actively converting religion.
Hebrew versus Jew. Hebrew is the religious part, is it not? Hebrew is the nationality?
It could go
Did I
either
miss
way.
it?
No, it can be understood either way. It could be understood either way. So you talk about Hebrew, it can be the nationality, it can be the religion. Talk about a Jewish person, that could be the religion or the nationality.
Huh.
Just depends on the context in which it's being used.
I always thought that Hebrew was like an Old Testament term and Jewish was New Testament.
It's
Is
more
that wrong?
Yeah, I think you're going to find more traditional Jewish people use Hebrew because of the Old Testament, right? Because
Okay.
that's the terminology in there. The Jewish people who are more nationality than religious will use Jewish, right? That terminology. So, like, you do see those distinctions, but for the most part, those terms are interchangeable, just depending again on the context and the person.
Would they be Hebrewites then?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
Hebrew coffee.
It's kind of like Iowa. Like, are you Iowans? Are you Iowegians? Like, what's the
Iowa.
yeah? What's the? You know, we have Minnesotans. It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
but what is Iowa? Or even like Wisconsin, like Wisconsinites? Like, is that like what is? Go ahead, Denise. You
So then when was that switch over from when they were referred to as children of Israel to Hebrew?
Yeah. So in terms of like in the scriptures, when did that happen?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think those terms are interchangeable in scripture too. It's almost kind of like the Jacob Israel piece, right, where his name gets
yeah.
changed about. Now I think that there might be some interesting things when you look to see like the context in which it's used. So we talked about the difference between manna and the bread of heaven, right? So manna was the term that the people of Israel used to describe this, but God never called it manna. He called it the bread from heaven, because the tie-in was to Jesus, who is the bread from heaven. Like, that's how he identifies himself, right? And so I think it would be interesting in those changings to see if there's any significance to that, right? Is there something in the context that God is saying in that terminology? Because as we've talked, well, I mean, even just in the walls and the wood and exacting, it's not like God gets lazy with his semantics, right? Or his syntax and just says, well, I think we'll just call them Hebrews today and, you know, the Israelites tomorrow. And, you know, there's sometimes a purpose behind that in terms of the word choice given. So, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure that there's a defining, like, this is when it happens, but I think it would be an interesting study, or if you ever come across that, to look into what's going on around it, just to see if there's anything that might be speaking to the word choice, the phrasing in it.
And the word manna means, what is this?
Yeah.
They
What
didn't
is
know
this?
what it was.
Yeah, what is this? Manna means, what is this? No.
They found out.
Well,
And then
still
they did-
finding out in Exodus
Yeah.
27. Yeah. They're still getting it. Good. Any other thoughts?
A question I came up, I don't know when for me, is I've heard that the Jewish religion, whatever, kind of eliminates Isaiah.
I don't know about that.
They kind of ignore it, especially 53, you know.
Yeah, I can't speak to that. I don't know. I haven't heard that per se, but I do know that there are things in Isaiah that people question.
Yeah.
In terms of textual authenticity, but I don't know if that's a. Sorry, I had a sneeze coming.
Well, they
Sorry, we're good.
suggest that the forecasting, the prophecy of the Messiah is not Jesus.
Yeah, right. That is for sure. Yep.
That they're saying, that's not Jesus.
Yep.
He's yet to come.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, that's where they definitely distinguish
That part
that
of
out.
it they will
Yeah.
eliminate.
Yeah. But in terms of actual like removing it, I don't know.
No, I don't know if they remove it, but I've heard, I've only heard this because I don't know, that they either ignore it or it's not considered much in any of the study of not Old Testament, that's not, the law and the prophets.
Right.
He's
But-
kind of a prophet, kind of,
Yeah, I don't know that there's any significance that they would give to it outside of just Isaiah speaking to the context. Because when Isaiah is speaking in that, you can apply it to the moment. It's not like you're
Yeah.
sitting there, it's not like people are going, what is he talking about here? Like, what
Right.
does this have to do with what we're doing? Like, you go, oh, okay, so he's speaking to this, but he's also speaking to Jesus, right? And so I
Yeah.
think that's where you can just, you can bypass it and say, well, there's no Jesus here. It's just Isaiah speaking to the context and the people of the time and the events of the time.
does Josephus talk about not the resurrection, but the history of the crucifixion and all that of Jesus?
I think his mention of Jesus is more just in his, there was a man Jesus that they followed. I can't remember the exact quote that he provides, but it's kind of a passing statement, but it's a notable statement for what it is. Yeah, but I can't remember the exact wording in it.
Yeah, I just wondered if he, as a first century historian, would I mean, we look at it as a big deal, obviously, you know, but maybe from a different perspective, different culture, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
They crucified people all the time.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of history that Josephus could write about with the Roman Empire, right? There's a
Yeah,
ton of things,
yeah.
and yet he chose to at least include something
Okay.
about this Jesus guy, which tells
Okay.
you that it's more than just a blip on the radar,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so then let's wrap up 26 for sure. You shall make a screen for the entrance of the tent to eliminate mosquitoes. No. Entrance of the tent of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twine linen embroidered with needlework, and you shall make for the screen 5 pillars of acacia and overlay them with gold. Their hooks shall be of gold, and you shall cast 5 bases of bronze for them. So again, it's just kind of, again, separating. It's not the Holy of Holies, because we just talked about that one. This is the one that goes into the most holy place, so just outside the Holy of Holies. And so again, it's not meant for everybody, so you got to have the screen up, if that makes sense, so that not just anybody walks in. Those are for the priests that would be part of bread eating and things of that nature. Good. Any other questions before we jump into 27? All right, so it says in 27, you shall make the altar of acacia wood, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits broad. The altar shall be square, and its height shall be 3 cubits, and you shall make horns for it on 4 corners. Its horns shall be of one piece with it, and you shall overlay it with bronze. You shall make pots for it to receive its ashes, and shovels and basins and forks and fire pans. You shall make all its utensils of bronze. You shall also make for it a grating, a network of bronze. And on the net you shall make 4 bronze rings at its 4 corners. And you shall set it under the ledge of the altar, so that the net extends halfway down the altar. And you shall make poles for the altar, poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with bronze. And the poles shall be put through the rings, so that the poles are on the 2 sides of the altar when it is carried. You shall make it hollow with boards. As it has been shown to you on the mountain, so shall it be made. So it shall be written, so it shall be done. Right? All right, do you guys have this at all?
No,
Yeah.
not that.
Maybe someone does, maybe not others.
That's
Sorry,
not
maybe
done.
out,
No.
'cause it basically gives the picture of what we're going to start talking about now in this chapter. So it allows you to kind of see the image. So the bronze altar that we're talking about, so in the picture, you know, this is what we just got done talking about, right? We got done talking about the tabernacle, that kind of tent area. So now as we talk, we're talking about this square right in front here. That's the bronze altar. Oops.
Can we get one?
There's more in the back. We have some more we can toss up there.
Not yet, we already have one.
So we just got done talking about this. Now
Yeah,
we're looking
yeah.
right there, that bronze altar. And then we'll also talk about this bowl here, as well as some of the other things that go with it.
So the tabernacle's in the middle of this, right?
The tabernacle is towards the back.
Yeah.
That's the thing with smoke coming out of it.
Right,
Yeah. Which is God's presence.
right.
Those are mountains.
Okay. So that's, when we talk about the bronze altar, that's what we're talking about. Okay, it's that square piece right there. And when you look at that courtyard, that's where everybody could be, right? So it's a general gathering area. It's a general assembly area. It's not exclusionary. The only place where it would be exclusionary is if there was a foreigner or a sojourner who wasn't an Israelite. They were not allowed into this at the point. In the temple with Solomon, there was a courtyard for the Gentiles. So eventually, even foreigners, sojourners could be in the temple courtyard. But right now, this is just for God's people, Israel, if that makes sense. Okay. And so we see that that bronze altar, that was where the sacrifices were made. And you can see that with the utensils that are kind of laid out there. Verse 3, you shall make pots for it to receive its ashes, and shovels and basins and forks and fire pans. Oh my. You shall make all its utensils of bronze. So you got these pots to receive the ashes, which would be used in various rituals, ceremonies, things of that nature when sacrifices were made. You had shovels, obviously, to collect the ashes. This thing is on fire. It's a hot thing. You're not going to just walk in, grab a handful, walk out with it, right? The basins themselves were for the blood. So you would put the blood in the basin, and that's where it would go from the sacrifice. And then the fire pans obviously are there for the fire, right? Like it's what is creating the fire. And so you've got these different utensils and tools that are being used to manage that. And then you get into the grating and a net, all of those things that kind of go into it. So in other words, things that you can have the sacrifice sit on, lay on, without having to actually like touch it or anything where you might burn yourself or hurt yourself in that way. Something that holds it in place.
It looks like there's no door to get in there.
Yeah, I noticed.
Well, there's a
Oh,
little
it's
guy. It's all solid fence.
The right in front, that
Yeah.
kind of miscolored
There's
place.
3 of them.
Yeah,
Oh.
that miscolored fencing, if you will. Yeah, because it's meant to be enclosed at all times. The reason for that is because, I mean, again, as we talked about, like the sojourners and things of that nature, but also a wild animal could just walk in, right? And not just
A lot of people out around too.
correct. Yeah, 100%. So they're seeing, and so it's meant to be. It's meant to be a thing that says, hey, this space is special and sacred, right? You think of like our sanctuary. We have definition to it because it is a special and sacred place. Now, everybody is welcome to come into our sanctuary. But you still need to have that sacredness and that specialness to it. Otherwise, it's just another space. And that's what we have in these curtains, these fencings, for lack of a better way of saying it is. It's very much saying, hey, what's happening here is very special and unique. And it's not just for everything or everyone to be a part of. Yeah. Yep.
Once a year, when they would bring their sacrifices, don't they, am I wrong, don't they bring it in the tabernacle and that's where the smoke is coming from?
So they bring sacrifices throughout the year. There's different kinds of sacrifices to make throughout the year. Yep.
Okay.
100%. The one you're talking about is like the Day of Atonement, which is
Right.
the
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
one, right? Where
Yeah.
there's forgiveness. And so that's where the sacrifice is made outside and then they bring it in to the Holy of Holies, if that makes
Okay.
sense. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. With the priest's garments, his job is to represent the people in the Holy of Holies. And so what he's bringing into it for sacrifice is from the people, right? And so, yeah, it's very much something that happened outside, because nothing unclean can enter into the Holy of Holies, right? You can't bring in an animal to sacrifice inside of it, if that makes sense. That has to be done outside, and then you bring in the actual sacrifice that God wants, right? So like the blood, all that stuff has to be left outside.
So do they bring in the ashes or they don't bring in?
So they would
anything
bring
in?
in the refined fire piece of that, right? So ashes
Okay.
or things of that nature, because fire is a refining thing. It cleanses, it purifies, right? That's kind of the imagery behind that. I did misspeak on the blood component. They would bring that blood in, right? Because that's part of the sacrifice, but it's not, I'm trying not to be graphic on that. It's not actively draining the blood in the Holy of Holies,
Okay.
right? That has to be done
Oh,
outside,
okay.
and then it comes inside.
Okay,
Right.
interesting.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do that in a way that's not just so graphic and gross.
There is no way.
But it's something that happens out there, and even so, it talks about in there like the four horns on the bronze piece, right? The concept with that is that if somebody were to, when they would make the sacrifice, when they would drain the blood, they would sometimes take that blood, put it on the four horns, and that way it would be a symbol of what's happening there is going out into the community, right? So as the horns are outward, right, if that makes
Okay,
sense.
Okay.
And so sometimes that was the symbolism tied to that, is they would put the blood on those four horns as a way to show the community this blood is covering your sin, your sacrifice, whatever it might be. Yeah, what's up?
Maybe it's a little bit confusing that there's a cloud of smoke coming out of the Holy of Holies.
Mhm.
That's not a cloud of smoke coming out, that's God coming in.
That's actually the smoker. They just got one of those new. No, I'm just
I knew I was wrong.
yeah. That's why we ask questions, Nate. That's why we ask
If
questions.
you look at the description of the tabernacle on
Yep.
it says right up at the top, the most holy place was such and such. It was there that Yahweh would descend to meet the people in a cloud of theophany.
Yep.
So it's a cloud?
Yeah, that's a cloud. Yes.
Not smoke.
And that's the way that people knew God was in the tabernacle.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
His presence was with them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
And so that's a great call out, Nate. 100%. But yeah, it's not smoke from a smoker, right? Like it's actually going inside the tabernacle, showing God's presence is with His people. Yeah, 100%.
You know, they'd have to go in there by shifts. I'm looking at this and saying, how does 1 million people get in there?
Yeah. Well, it's a big space. I think the court of the tabernacle. It's a big space, but yeah, you can't all go in there at one time. Yeah. And I think that was the benefit of the temple, is that it was obviously a much bigger space. Like you could hold more people, but then again, also there was more people to hold than just like the 1 million that were walking through the wilderness, right?
Hmm.
I don't even know what is the current population of Israel at the moment.
I don't know.
Where did they go? Did I leave it somewhere? Must have left it somewhere. Oh, wait. Ha! Got it. I'm just a mess up here. Sorry about that. Let's see here.
5 million.
Is it 5 million?
I don't know. Nice call, though.
Guess I guess.
9.5 million
In Israel?
in Israel.
Okay.
Yeah. That doesn't include Palestine or Lebanon in that. Just
Does
as
not.
kind of, yeah, it does not. 5 million is Minnesota, so whoever said 5 million, it's right on the nose for Minnesota. Yeah, it's
That's
good.
exactly 5 million.
It's exactly 5. No, I don't. I think it's like 5. Yeah, 5.012, and you go, who's the 012? Like, who is that? You know.
A baby.
Yeah, that's the baby. Yeah, 100%. So yeah, you obviously got to get a ton more people in there, right? Temple gets bigger, but it's not. It's still, you got to, as you said, Ross. There's shifts, right? There's moments,
Yeah.
and there's ways to handle that.
8:30 and 10:45.
Yeah, it's every 5 o'clock on Saturdays. So. Well, actually, probably nothing on Saturday because that was the Sabbath, so probably nothing then. Yeah. Good. Also, so as we talk about this, the bronze altar, this would also be the place where the priests would get their food from. So there would be moments where people would leave sacrifices. The priests would get their food from that because that's part of the nation of Israel's obligation to the Levite clan, the Levite tribe. They didn't have a land of their own, right? They were dependent on everybody for their care. And so this would be a way that they would receive their food, right? A way for the people of Israel to also take care of the Levites, the priests, and things of that nature. So.
What they typically sacrifice is the same type of animal all the time.
Yeah, sometimes they were prescribed, in terms of like a dove or pigeon or whatever it might be. Other times it's, sheep or goat. It just depends on what God may have said connected to the sacrifice being offered. Yeah, but oftentimes I think Jesus, when he was in the temple, there were birds. I think there was the birds in there. We've seen in the Old Testament sheeps and goats used a lot. No donkeys though. We talked about that. No donkeys.
Sea cows.
What's that?
Sea cows.
And sea cows were used for waterproofing, but yeah, oftentimes it was the sheep and the goats, and then like a pigeon dove kind of situation. It seemed to be the most
They were allowed
common.
to use a pigeon and a dove if they couldn't afford to buy a lamb or a goat.
Say that again, Nate, louder.
They were allowed to use a pigeon or a bird if they could not afford to buy a sheep or a goat
That's right.
to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Then they could, like the widow's mite, her sacrifice of 2 shillings was all she could afford. And that's how they rated it.
Yeah. Yeah, so did you all hear that from Nate? Okay, yeah, it's really important to understand that element, that there's options for people in that. But this is where the temple system gets corrupt in Jesus' day, and even before. I mean, it's not like Jesus shows up and then it gets corrupt. It's been that way. There was a temple currency. And so you had to convert your money, like, you know, like a dollar bill, for example. It would be like if you wanted to give an offering to Beautiful Savior and you wanted to give $1, we're going, oh no, I'm sorry, the dollar's no good here. We'll give you 75 cents for your dollar, and that's what gets counted. So it was always in favor of the temple, if that makes sense, the conversion rate, which is what was the issue, because now you're taking advantage of people who cannot afford to buy even a pigeon or a dove, so they can't take part in the sacrifices or the offerings, and on it goes. So it was quite the pyramid scheme. You know,
Yeah,
there was a lot involved with that got corrupted. It was intentionally beautiful and pure, and all of a sudden someone has an idea. Hey, what if we have our own currency, and then we completely undervalue theirs, right? Wouldn't that be great?
Den of thieves.
Yeah, that's Jesus' words. All right, so let's get into the court of the tabernacle. Any other questions on the bronze altar? So now we're talking about that whole area, right? We're just talking about the whole shebang there. You shall make the court of the tabernacle. On the south side of the court shall have hangings of fine twined linen, 100 cubits long for one side. Its 20 pillars and their 20 bases shall be of bronze, but the hooks of the pillars and their fillets. Oh, what is that? Hooks. And their hooks shall be of silver. And likewise for its length, on the north side shall there be hangings 100 cubits long, its pillars 20, and their bases 20 of bronze. But the hooks of the pillars and their hooks shall be of silver. And for the breadth of the court on the west side, there shall be hangings for 50 cubits with 10 pillars and 10 bases. The breadth of the court on the front to the east shall be 50 cubits. The hanging for the one side of the gate shall be 15 cubits with their 3 pillars and the 3 bases. On the other side, the hanging shall be 15 cubits with their 3 pillars and 3 bases. For the gate of the court there shall be a screen 20 cubits long, of blue and purple and scarlet yarns, and fine twined linen, embroidered with needlework. It shall have 4 pillars, and with them 4 bases. All the pillars around the court shall be hooked with silver. Their hooks shall be of silver, and their bases of bronze. The length of the court shall be 100 cubits, the breadth 50, the height 5, and with hangings of fine twined linen and bases of bronze. All the utensils of the tabernacle for every use, and all its pegs, and all the pegs of the courts shall be of bronze. There's a lot there.
And remember, they carried all of that through the desert for 40 years.
That's what I was going to say, is this was some assembly required, right?
Yeah.
As they worked in the wilderness.
IKEA.
It's taking it down, it's putting it back up, it's taking it down, it's putting it back up. There's a lot in that. And the schedule of that, I can't remember if there was somebody in this class, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself here, but someone had mentioned, well, how do you, they were moving daily, right? Do you pick this thing up and move it daily, right? That kind of concept. And you might have to, right? But I think also, if you just set it up, and I'm just making this up, but if you set it up here, and the people are all back here, to move 1 million people this way takes a long time. I don't know that you necessarily have to, if they're all here, you have to keep it in front the entire time. You might just be able to keep it while they progress, and then you catch back up, if that makes sense. But also, the intentionality behind this, the purpose behind this, was not to make sure they kept their progress the same, but it was to revolve their entire lives around the tabernacle. And so whatever that needed to do, whatever they needed to do, that's what was done. So just as a silly example, you know, they get close to the promised land. Let's say they see the sign, promised land, 5 miles, right? And they're going, man, we can get there today, right? Like we could get there today if we just work. But at the same time, there's a sacrifice that's required in the tabernacle, right? They're not gonna go, well, we could do the 5 miles and then we'll do the sacrifice tomorrow. They're stopping everything.
Yeah.
And they're doing their sacrifice around the tabernacle because that's the requirement. And that's the way God sets it up. Oftentimes we think of, okay, we got to get to the progress. We got to keep moving, whatever that is. But what God is setting up here is, no, your whole lives revolve around this. And so your progress, your movement, whatever that might be, is based solely on this thing, right? It's centered on this. It revolves around this. So even if it means you can't make 10 miles because you wanted to make 10 miles, so be it. You had to make sure it revolved around the tabernacle. Yeah, Denise.
I think to go along with that, I thought that they just moved when the pillar of fire or the cloud moved.
Yeah.
You
There's
know,
elements
so
of that
it's,
too.
so it's like, maybe they sat there for a week or a
Yep.
month.
Yep.
You know, and it's kinda like, am I willing to wait, you know, am I
40.
willing to wait on the Lord?
Yep.
Or am I going to decide I'm gonna pick up my toys and move?
Yep. You mean God was serious when he said, wait on the Lord?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Huh.
the gist, right? Like,
You know, because I think we do think a lot of times, oh, they were moving every day, and
Yeah.
I think there was a whole lot of sitting in the sand.
They had
I
4.
do, you know,
Yep,
and
yep.
frustrating.
No, absolutely. I'm sure there's
Yeah.
people who are like, we could make better progress.
Right.
Or even you think about the grumbling and complaining.
Right.
You know, if there's you know, it's hot, we don't have water, like where's our food, you know, those kinds of things. Well, if you're sitting there and not making any progress, you're not going to find food at that point because you already know it's not there. Like it's a living incarnation of waiting on the Lord, right? 100%. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, they also had 40 years that they were wandering
Yeah, that's what I was
around
gonna.
there.
Yep.
So it wasn't like they were going from point A to point B
Yep.
directly.
No,
Yeah.
no.
40 years out there.
Over here,
But
back,
would you think
up,
some of the
around,
things
down.
that
Geocaching, is that what that's called, where you kind of just follow things around? Yeah.
We've seen that.
And people would die and people would be born. I mean, when you think about it, what do they do then if somebody dies? Do they stop and bury that person or?
That's a
you know?
good question. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that they would carry it with them because corpses are unclean, right? Like you cannot touch one, you cannot like, so I think you have to bury in those elements, so, yeah.
Jacob's bones were moved.
Joseph's bones were,
Joseph.
Joseph's bones were taken into the promised land, yep. So you just have to save an entire nation to people to make sure you get that kind of treatment, right, after you pass away, so, no.
Gotta wait till everything rots off and then take the bones.
It's just, I mean, it's the promise, right? And you think
Yeah.
about that, it's the promise that was made and the promise kept. And even something like that where we just go, wow, like, what is that, right? It doesn't change the promise kept portion of it, which is the incredible nature of God in that. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Was it not true that none of the people that left Egypt made it to the promised land except Moses, and including Moses, except Joshua?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good question, because I know basically Moses' generation and up were not allowed into the promised land.
Right.
And you think about, I think Moses, what did we say, was he 80 when he went into Egypt to to get the people out of slavery? I think it was 80,
Yeah.
which is young. I mean, that's
Right.
really
Oh,
young,
yeah.
you know, in terms of the time frame and things. So I don't think that that's out of the realm of possibility, but I'd be curious because obviously, like as Bernie was saying here, you know, there have been births along the way, right, which would not be of Moses' generation.
Right.
Joshua was obviously older than those who were born because he was part of the battle that happened, the one battle we got to talk about so far. Yeah, I don't know. I just from that progression or that perspective, I don't know that would be that would be the
Look that up
case.
again.
What did it say? I thought it was anyone 40 and below.
Was it 40 and below?
Yep.
Hmm. Is that a generation? That seems.
Right.
40 doesn't sound right for a generation.
Right, you're born along the way you got in, otherwise you died.
It says in, let's see here. What's the,
I think Caleb and Joshua make it, because they were the two good spies.
apparently in, yeah. So it seems like in Hebrews of all places, which we've talked about in some of these elements already, verse 3, 18 to 19, it says, specifically 8 and 19, so we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. And that would be the first generation of Israel, is what that is. So kind of that, I think Moses on up, if that makes sense. But I don't have anything that's standing out to me as to,
Yeah, I have to do a little digging.
yeah. Yeah. Which includes Aaron in that, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question, Nate. Good question. All right, so yeah, the courts of the tabernacle, we talked about that a little bit, the essential nature of that. I mean, obviously to provide a sacred space, right? This is a special spot. This isn't just for anybody. But also you were in the wilderness. Random animals could walk in, and those animals aren't always clean, right? It creates issues for the sacredness, the specialness of the space that's happening there. Any questions about that at all? Yeah, go ahead, Ruth.
I have one comment that, you're saying that they're taking it down and they're putting it back up and taking it down and putting it back up. And that they may have had a division of people that you're the pole putter uppers and you're the, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's not a learning curve
Mm-hmm.
each time you're putting it up. You may have a group that is responsible for that, so it isn't as overwhelming as, just like a circus tent,
Yeah.
It's just saying, okay, these people do this job, this people do this job.
Yeah.
And you kind of wonder that, because it doesn't seem like you would have a new crew all the time.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm remembering vaguely here was that it was the priest's job, the Levites. That was their responsibility to set up and take down the tabernacle in its movements, which would make sense because they're the only ones who can really go into the most holy place and the Holy of Holies, right? And so, yeah, you didn't want another tribe walking in there. So that would be, from what I understand, that would be the rotation. Now, I don't know if they had assigned duties. It would make sense if they did. I think there was Zachariah, so John the Baptist's dad, right? He was a priest. Or was he a rabbi? He was a priest.
He was a Nazarite.
Yeah, no, he was a rabbi then. It wasn't.
Oh, he was.
Yeah. Man, I remembered this last week. Now I can't remember it. Hang on.
Sounds familiar.
He was a Jewish priest.
He was a Jewish priest.
Yep, yep. Because they talked about. The reason I bring that up is because it talks about with Zechariah when he was on his rotation, there is some kind of shifting that happens, right? That's why I bring that up. But so there's more than likely those things. Obviously, there is only one high priest, right? That's not a job that everybody gets to do, at least for the most part, if I remember correctly. But there's a lot of other priests that were Levites, so. Yeah. Good. All right, let's talk about the oil for lamp. You shall command the people of Israel that they bring to you pure beaten olive oil for the light, that a lamp may regularly be set up to burn in the tent of meeting, outside the veil that is before the testimony. Aaron and his sons shall tend it from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a statute forever to be observed throughout their generations by the people of Israel. So this is if you remember the lamp, the menorah essentially that we talked about a couple weeks ago now. This is the oil that's going to go in that thing, right? And so the concept is that they wanted pure beaten olive oil, meaning that the more beaten up it is, the less smoky it is,
Pressed.
right?
It says pressed oil.
Yours says pressed?
Pressed olives.
Yeah, mine says pure beaten olive oil. So yeah, pressed is the same thing. That's how you beat it up essentially. Is you refine it over and over and over again. You keep screening it for impurities, for lack of a better way of saying it. So yeah, pressed is a great way to look at it. And that again, so you didn't have smoke. And just from a practical standpoint, if it's to be burning at all times and it's smoky, it's a really heavy enclosed space. Then all of a sudden the picture becomes smoke coming out versus smoke coming in, right? Like as we talked about. So it's an important dynamic there, but also that concept of it needs to burn continually, right? From what does it say there? From evening to morning before the Lord. Why? So that it never appears dark, right? The point is in that there's always a light that shines in this. Then during the day, the light is that sun, right? It's that reminder of God's presence. But when the darkness comes, where is that reminder? Where is that hope? That's there in the light that continues to burn. And that's why Aaron and his sons will tend to it, because it needs to continually burn. It needs to continually shine so that there is a continual reminder of God's presence for his people, no matter the time of day.
So did the barrels of oil then never run empty because they wandered for 40 years?
Yeah, it's a great question.
And they didn't grow olive trees while they were wandering.
Yeah, it's a great question. I know there's the intertestamental story of the oil that never ran out, right? Like that's kind of one of the significant pieces, that it just kept burning, even though it should have gone out, right? On multiple occasions. Yeah, I don't know. I would imagine that there are probably some olive branches, whatever the trees. I'm not sure what it would be.
That were planted.
That were just on the journey, right? But at the same time, I think what would be interesting is to know how much oil is created from like a single olive, right? Is that a gusher, or is it like just a tiny like squid? I think that would be probably part of that too, is understanding that. But no, if you're going to keep it burning, it's not just going to burn itself, right? Like you have to make sure you have enough to keep it going and tend to it.
Well, God provided the manna and the
for
oil,
sure.
and
Yep.
why we could have done the oil too.
Yep.
So
Oh yeah, absolutely.
it's going to get the job done.
Yep.
Was the light source inside the tabernacle always lit 24 hours a day? Because you said about the sun, and obviously,
Yeah.
because of all the heavy-duty clothing and stuff, there's no way the sun's getting through.
Right, and that's where I would say I don't see why it wouldn't be lit all day, lighted all day. I don't know why it wouldn't be, right?
Okay.
So I don't think it's wrong to say it was, if that makes sense. But God clearly states in here, especially in those moments of darkness, that thing has to be lighted, has to remain lighted. Yeah.
Is there a
100%.
correlation to the Paschal candle and that?
It's a good question, Ross. I don't know that I've ever made that connection in terms of like the question behind it. I'd have to look into that to see if there's any kind of connection to the candlelight menorah, essentially, in this, to ours in the sanctuary. I don't know. Usually churches have like an eternal light that usually burns.
Yeah.
And it used to be a real candle that would burn.
Yeah.
Now a lot of churches kind of bought the '80s candle that like flickers.
Yeah, yeah.
Doesn't look real, right? But usually that's kind of the light continuing to shine, if that makes sense. I think more so the Paschal candle is a reflection of Christ being the light of the
Yeah.
world. But I don't know if there's any
But he's
kind
God.
of traditional
I mean,
connection to it.
Christ is God.
Right.
And
Oh, yeah.
so is God.
Right.
Here in the Old Testament, you know,
Yep.
so.
Yeah, and
the
I
light
don't know if
burns.
there's just any traditional connections to
Oh,
that.
okay.
I just know from like how we see it at Beautiful Savior is it's more like a Christ connection
Yeah.
versus like a light that
Yeah.
continues to shine. Because
Yeah, I remember.
it won't. It's wax. It'll diminish real quick, and the fire chief will not be happy with us. So, but I will look to see if there's a connection.
Yeah, I don't
and
know.
just see. Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, it's a great connection.
Yeah.
Great question. Any other questions before we wrap up? Yeah, go
Just
ahead.
real quick, Joe, according to Numbers, chapter 14, 24 to 30, it says, God promised that every person 20 years old or older would die in the wilderness and would not see the land, with the exception of Caleb and Joshua. So everybody that entered the Holy Land was under 20 years old.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
It's
Well,
ageism.
What?
No, I'm just kidding.
What?
No, but it's, 20 years and, yep.
In Joshua 5:5, it talks about when they're in Gilgal, when they're entering into the promised land, they're recircumcising everybody who's under 40 because of the fact that everyone 40 and above had died in the wilderness.
Sure. So did it take 20 years to get from that point to that point, or what that
Yeah.
is?
Huh.
I'll have to look into that.
Recircumcised? That sounds.
Sounds awful. It sounds awful.
Now you're 40.
And we'll end on that note. Let's close in prayer. Lord God, thank you that you continue to let your light shine here, Lord, that even when there is no oil for burning it, you just continue to make your presence known. And just help us, Lord, in the days to come, today in particular, that you just continue to let your light shine here. We thank you that you are the God who cares and loves for us and provides for us, even in the exacting things. And so just continue to help us see your care and provision, to see that light. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Joe, what's the guy for word for the week?
Peter.
And it's
Matthew.
Oh, yeah.
Matthew.